All right, so today we're going to dig into a really fascinating and kind of forgotten chapter in Australian history. We're talking about a time when the government wasn't just trying to manage unemployment, its goal was to create a world where there was a shortage of workers, not a shortage of jobs. It's an incredible story, and it all comes from an 80-year-old document that pretty much challenges everything we think we know about work today. So let's just jump right in with this quote. This is from an official Australian government paper written way back in 1945. And the goal, right there in black and white, was to build an economy with a tendency towards a shortage of men instead of a shortage of jobs. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. A government actively trying to create a worker shortage. From where we're sitting today, that sounds completely wild, doesn't it? A world where companies are all competing for workers instead of the other way around. So the big question is, how on earth was this ever a serious, achievable political goal? Well, it all goes back to this really critical moment right at the end of World War II. It gave rise to this incredibly ambitious promise, all laid out in something called the 1945 White Paper on Full Employment. This thing was a radical new vision for the entire country. To really get what they were thinking, you have to understand the context. First, you had the 1930s, just miserable years of high unemployment. And it was so bizarre, right? People desperately needed things like housing and food, and the country had the ability to make it, but it just wasn't happening. Then came World War II, and everyone learned this huge lesson. The only thing actually limiting production was physical stuff, people and materials, not a lack of money. And that wartime experience is exactly what sparked the 1945 White Paper. So the whole philosophy was built around this idea of real resource constraints. It completely flipped the script on government spending. The big question stopped being, how are you going to pay for it? And it became, do we have the actual people and the materials to do it? The thinking was pretty straightforward. Since the government issues its own currency, its only real limit is reality itself, the physical resources we have, not the number in a bank account. This just totally rewired their whole approach to the economy. Okay, but a vision is one thing. You need an engine to actually make it happen. And for this plan, that engine was a brand new public institution, the Commonwealth Employment Service, or the CES. So let's pop the hood and see how this machine worked. And when you look at what the CES was responsible for, the sheer scope is just mind-blowing. This was way, way more than just a place to look for job ads. It was giving career advice to kids fresh out of school, providing specialized help for disabled workers, even directly setting up farmers with seasonal labor. It was basically the nerve center for the entire national workforce. And that really gets to the core of it. The CES wasn't just sitting back and waiting for things to happen. Nope. It was an active, comprehensive planning agency for the whole country. It was constantly collecting data, trying to figure out what skills would be needed in the future, and then using that info to shape everything from apprenticeships to immigration programs. All of it was designed to keep that economic engine running at full tilt. So that system, it's long gone now. What happened? Well, let's dive into that, because what we see is this fundamental shift in focus, a whole new ideology that came in and changed everything. This right here puts the two ways of thinking side by side, and the difference is, well, it's stark. The post-war goal was full employment. If people were out of work, it was seen as a systemic problem. There just weren't enough jobs, so the government's job was to make sure there were. But the modern neoliberal focus shifted to full employability. All of a sudden, the problem got reframed as an individual failure, lazy or unskilled workers. And the government's job was just to get those people job ready. And this new ideology led to a totally new system. The public CES was taken apart, and in its place, we got a private model, a process people call the marketization of employment services. So how does this new private model actually work? Well, basically, the government pays a whole bunch of for-profit companies to do the job. If you're unemployed, you're managed by one of these private providers. And the focus is heavily on compliance, right? Making sure you're ticking all the boxes, applying for jobs, doing the training. The big criticism here is that success gets measured by all that activity, not necessarily by whether people find good, stable, long-term jobs. So what's the final verdict on this new system? Well, the author of our source material, they don't mince words. They call this shift to a private model an unmitigated disaster for workers. Okay, so let's put it all together and really break down this contrast. On one side, you have a centralized public agency. On the other, a scattered private market. This is the absolute core difference we've been talking about. This table just lays it all out so clearly. Let's walk through it. The mission. The CES had a systemic goal: make sure there are enough jobs for everyone. The privatized model is individual. Just make the person job ready. Information. The CES was a central hub for the whole country's planning. Today, that info is scattered across competing private companies. Worker support. The CES was integrated with health and social services. Now it's mostly about acting as a middleman for training contracts. And finally, the big one, the economic role. The CES was a proactive planning agency. The source argues the modern system acts more like a discipline mechanism for the unemployed.
So after going through all this history, you have to ask the question, right? Could this old model, this thing from 1945, actually be a blueprint for today? Are there any lessons we can actually take from it?
And this is where we get to the source's most provocative point. The argument isn't that the old system failed and had to be replaced. The argument is that the CES was dismantled precisely because it was working. It was just too good at achieving a goal, real, genuine, full employment, that, according to the source, later governments simply didn't want anymore. And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. In our world, with AI, automation, and the whole gig economy, what can a blueprint from 1945 possibly teach us about the future of work? It kind of suggests that the biggest question isn't about what's technologically possible, but about what we as a society really want our economy to do for us. That's definitely something worth thinking about.